Right. Good. Okay. So for my senior seminar, I chose to discuss the topic of storytelling and more importantly, why it matters to us as Christians and as human beings. And so first, I'd like to give like a very basic definition from the Oxford Dictionary, which is an account of an imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment. And then also the activity of telling or writing stories. And so while this is very basic, it helps to give us a basis in which we know about storytelling and what it actually is. And so in my research, I really encountered three different methods that we communicate our stories with people around us, which is oral tradition, verbal storytelling, written language or literature, or technological methods. And so first, let's get into to what these three are, and before we understand the importance of them. So oral tradition, I defined as verbal communication was the main way of sharing art, ideas, transmitting knowledge, and most importantly, stories before the introduction of written language. So basically, you talking to someone else, sharing your experience about yesterday or something like that is a story, and in that format, you're able to capture your own emotions and do other things like that. And it's also what's been around since the beginning of mankind, and it's all we've had before written language. And so the brief history, it's been around since the beginning, as I just said. It's also been a catalyst for ideas and human ingenuity. And so it's just it's able to have this own original nature to it, where it's it's different day to day. So your story is ever evolving with oral tradition, and yeah. And so people in different societies use a special oral language of formulaic phrases, typical scenes, and story patterns that enable their artistic activities. So each person is able to put their own kind of spin on these stories that they're able to tell. So it's like you have the idea of like a story that your parent would tell you, and when you tell it to your own kid, it has a different idea to it. Like it's a different thing, and you're able to show that through something else. And then more specific example of the actual historical aspect, in West African societies, like the region Sahel, there were members of the society specifically dedicated to memorizing that town or city's stories, like all the stories, all the values, any kind of moral guideline. There was one person for that, and they were dedicated to memorizing that thing. Um, and those were called griots, I think is how you say that. And so I have a quote from Abdul Fattah, I think. For centuries, griots have passed down the epics of Sahel through songs and stories, which with each person adding details that related to their lives and the lives of their audience. And this is how stories remain relevant across generations and cultures. So you have that aspect of one generation will be able to adapt a new story from what's being told before. So the importance of this specific kind of storytelling, it's an effective way to transmit knowledge between generations and seek moral lessons through these stories. Um, as we've previously said, it hops from generation, and it also has that same level of flexibility, where Mr. Satterfield's story will be different than his son's because of the generational time gap in that situation. Um, and they were, however, throughout the uniting factor is that they still can carry the same moral principles, um, despite maybe having different details and different aspects to it that are different. And this can be particularly seen through Aesop's fables, which is where Aesop's fables originally were oral. They were passed down from generation to generation, communicating the same morals, like the value of patience through the tortoise and the hare, and yeah, until they were eventually written down. And oral tradition just provides a basis for literature now. So like the development of stories and the ability to develop that communication gave us a basis for when we get into literature and other aspects. So then we go hop over to written language, which is the use of the written word in forms like novels, short stories, plays, or scripts to craft narratives that engage readers on a different level than before. Um, that's pretty straightforward. And so I'd like to get into the beginning of written language because that's how literature is able to develop and to become the stories we know today. So Sumerian cuneiform was introduced in 3400 BCE in Mesopotamia near the Fertile Crescent. However, it was introduced independently three different times. Obviously, that being the first, and then in 1200 BCE, Chinese characters were introduced in China, and then also Mayan glyphs were introduced in 300 BCE in Mesoamerica. Um, However, I'd like to focus on the first one, and it's also the one with the first instance of a written story itself. Um, Originally, it was used for keeping records instead of actual telling stories. It was more to keep track of crops and other important things in that society instead of guiding moral guidelines. Um, and so eventually, it passed on to the Babylonians and the Assyrians, which developed it into an Akkadian cuneiform, developing the language, enabling them to capture more feelings and deeper emotions than what you previously could. Um, and so then the actual first instance of an actual story is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a series of poems that were used to communicate um, strong moral principles of just being a hero and being caring for others in that story, and it was able to be passed through that society, and people were able to learn from that specifically. And then also paved the way for multiple different stories like the Kesh Temple hymn and the instructions of Shrupak, which also just explored morals that tracked with those societies. Um, in these first languages, they provided a way for us to develop our language, or not our English specifically, but our languages that enable us to tell stories and whatnot. So what's the impact of literature itself? It's the same as oral tradition. It's able to preserve culture as well engage in cross-cultural exchange, perhaps better than oral tradition because you have that idea where it's able to stay consistent with what the original author was trying to communicate. Where oral tradition, you have it changing throughout generation and generation, where eventually you're going to lead from the original and a final. It's going to be a different story. But with written language and literature, you don't have that. You have what the original person wrote, and you just have that consistently throughout the whole time. Um, as I just said, literature has the unique ability to clearly convey exactly what the original author intended, meaning, and it is not susceptible to changes throughout time. The only issue that could possibly come up is translational issues, but even then, it's going to be very similar to what the original author meant. Um, and it's also not conformed to a performance time, where oral tradition oftentimes were short stories. Like you think about the tortoise and the hare, and it's like, yeah, that's a really short story. It's like the griots or whoever was trying to tell the story had a certain amount of time they were able to tell it in, and it typically had to end by the end of the day because you wouldn't continue a story after the day had ended and whatnot. But literature is not confined by that, so they're able to explore themes on a deeper level than other oral tradition is able to. And so then we get to the last method, which is technological methods. In storytelling, technology refers to the tools, devices, and platforms used to create, share, and experience narratives. And with an emphasis on movies, artwork, and for this presentation, video games, because video games explore a different dynamic where you're able to actually experience what is going on instead of um, reading about someone experiencing that. So I'll go into the history of video games. And so video games started in like 1950s and 1970s where Pong was introduced. And obviously that's not what I'm after because it's Pong. There's nothing really going on there. Um, and so eventually you have the idea of world building and stuff developing where it's like The Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy. They released in 1986 and 1987 where you're introduced to NPCs, which provide a different human aspect um, to this thing. Well, it's not actually like a human, but it's paving the way for things to become more real for people to experience. Where in literature you have someone being described, to video games are just getting closer and closer to that. And then you get introduced to these games like Grand Theft Auto, and it's an open world, and there are just no moral consequences at all. So you're able to do whatever you want. With no consequences, and that's an example of a bad way to tell a story. it creates a problematic system where if you're a young child playing this game and you're like, oh wow, I can get away with anything, it translates to school issues and other things like that. And then later on in time, you get to games that your choices actually have consequences in the game itself and to your character, like Red Dead Redemption and Detroit Become Human. They're able to explore deeper themes that other people aren't able to, or other games aren't able to actually display, because your choices actually have impact on the people around you, and the story you are creating and paving for yourself actually has an impact. And so the importance of the technology part of this, it captures the essence of the story, and people are not only able to visualize the game, but they're also able to control the outcome, and it provides a certain level of like personal impact on this, that you're able to actually be the character and experience this for yourself, where when you're reading like literature or you're hearing about a story, you don't get that because you're watching someone else experience it and you can learn from them, but here you get to learn for yourself. um you also get to actually see the world instead of relying on your imagination to do something, which is good and bad at the same time. But being able to see it allows you to focus less on the actual like setting and stuff, and more on what they're trying to teach you and what you're actually trying to do in the story you're trying to create. Um, it allows for a deeper connection and a possibility for a deeper understanding, and it allows them to allow those things to shape them and change their viewpoint in the real world as well. Um, and video game developers are able to portray morals and themes through an actual visual story that the player gets to experience themselves, as I previously said. And there's something about the personal experience that leads to a greater moral impact. Um, so then you get into this like this situation where you have a combination of methods, where you get into a thing like voice acting, where it's a combination of the oral storytelling part and the actual technological part, where your storyteller is your voice actor, where they're truly able to embody this character and then also tell their story through like a show or whatever video game or whatever situation you have. They're just able to a the voice actor understands this moral, or they're the character themselves, but then the other people are able to feel that importance that that voice actor has, and it impacts them and guides them differently. So through this all, why is storytelling important? Through it all, it's the ability to convey meaning, morality, ethics, and complex emotions in something, whether fictional or literal, that is able to impact others. Um, and so it's just all these things have an impact. Every story you read and everything you do, everything you see or listen to, is going to have an impact on you, whether you know it or not. And so the things that are conveyed through these things are vastly are very important, because they have an impact on others, and things like that. And it's also an ever evolving method in which humanity can communicate moral principles and other life values through the test of time. So throughout these all, whether it's oral tradition, literature, or technological methods, you still have this ability to share your moral principles and your ideas to these other people that aren't in your society. Like you have these, like you read things from the Bible that are centuries old, and you're able to learn something from that nowadays. Um, and so every story has a meaning, and that meaning itself cannot define the story, and likewise the story aspect of story. So the meaning itself cannot define the story, but the story defines the meaning. And so each story you read is going to have that meaning that impacts other people. And C.S. Lewis has this quote: if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." And this points to, there's something about the stories we make that points to something greater, that points to something greater than ourselves, because we all have that desire, and it's exemplified through our storytelling itself, that there is something out there that is greater than ourselves, and that we derive these things from. So why is it important to Christians? Storytelling is so ingrained in everyday life that there is an ultimate good that can come from it. Um, but first, people actually have to put intentionality into it, and make it a personalized aspect, and put emphasis on actual helping other people instead of something like money. Um, So there is that emotional and intellectual like connection to stories, and it can be used to educate people in an exciting way instead of providing surface level amusement. So like the stories your pastor can tell, instead of being surface level, the way they tell the story and how they tell the story and what they're telling, typically comes from the Bible, but um, is able to connect with people differently and on a deeper level, and it increases education and it makes education better. The other aspect is we're actually making our own story, and our story has an impact on other people. So so what we do and what we decide to do actually matters because of the impact we have on other people. So if we make bad choices and someone's looking up to you, they're like, okay, they feel betrayed. Their trust is misplaced or whatever. But our own story actually matters. And so then I go to this Bible verse. Let me find it real quick. Okay. So the verse itself says Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. So as we see, our own personal Savior um, he tells what he thinks and the moral principles that he wants to convey for us through stories themselves. Like we get all these lessons from things that actually like from stories that he's telling. It enables us to understand a concept that is otherworldly to us. So that is like a godly concept. We're able to understand it through Jesus telling stories to us. That makes it more relatable to us because it's more um, relatable to our present society. And so he provides us the story of Jesus himself also provides the basis in which we live our lives as Christian and how we're supposed to impact others, which is wildly important. And Christians can also use stories and any methods to reach out to different people groups and to encourage the people already in the faith. So, so just the way we tell our stories and the intentionality behind our stories can increase human flourishing and enable us to have a greater impact on our society. That's my works cited, and then yeah.
I'll go and offer a few things. So first of all, good job. I When we started talking about this project, it's one of those where it's like it wasn't entirely clear what needed to be said. It's like you came, it's like I really like stories. What do I do with that, right? And I just want to commend you. Like it seemed like you knew what you wanted to say, right? And that was part of the research, just figuring out what there was to be said.
Yeah.
Right? So great job on that. I as a teacher, I find this really, really helpful. I'll tell you a story really quick. Sorry, y'all are just gonna have to listen to me a little more. Over the week, so over spring break, I was contacted by a student that I taught. She graduated high school 6 or 7 years ago, and I had told well, actually, no, it's 5 years ago because it was the spring that COVID shut everything down. I had told them a story and was cut off by the bell. And we went home that weekend thinking that we were going to get a couple of days off because COVID was becoming a problem. And what do you know? We didn't even come back to school. Like the next time I saw that group of seniors was in the parking lot at their graduation. So, anyways, 5 years later, she's contacting me saying, "Hey, you remember that story you told us? You never finished it. It's always driven me crazy." So, and I'm thinking, like, man, of all the things that I taught you, of all the things that we talked about, and it's like the story that you wanted. And okay, so but to prove your point, in my notes I just wrote down like something I need to remember as a teacher. If I have a lesson to teach you, a moral or a biblical thing to talk to you about, man, if I can attach that to a story, it's basically just loading ammunition. It's putting it in a way to where not only you remember it better, but it seems to form you better, impact you better. So like I appreciate it for all those things. So I got two questions for you real quick. One, let's do the easy one first. So, as far as your future is concerned, okay, and I know like you got plans.
Right.
How has this project made you think about like? Do you feel like other than everything you said was right about like we are living our own story, right? We're writing
Mhm.
our own story. Our stories impact other people. Yes and amen. Seriously, like you ever thought about writing a story? Like just writing I mean, based on everything you said, like what do you think about
I personally have not thought about writing a story because that's, I think, beyond my English capabilities.
And I was about to say, why are we going to I'm going to swing you over to the away from the dark side
The
to
dark side.
humanities.
Um,
You're gonna get
He's
from
already
the
heard
Lyceum,
from me,
but
okay, so a question that's not so embarrassing. All right, so here's and this one may be a little tougher to answer in a different way. So you mentioned I like how you did the historical development where we had the oral tradition. We
Mhm.
told stories verbally, orally, pass them on from one person to another. Great. And then we started writing it down. And yes, I think we gained a lot of stuff writing it down, right? Like we can now make sure that the text of scripture, we can go to manuscripts thousands of years ago and see like what we have today
Mhm.
is what they had written originally, right? And there's a lot of value in that. I wonder though, with what we gained with technology, and even now into video games as well, from oral to writing to technology, um, did we lose anything along the way?
Yes. So when you transition from something oral tradition to something like written language, you lose like the relatable nature to it. And when with technology, you kind of re-enter that. So like you read a book from like I don't know 5 centuries back, and you're like, okay, none of this is like my life today. And so it creates a situation where you have to search deeper for like the actual meaning, and you have to look past any type of old like uh, bad situation like racism, for example. And you have to look past that, and you're like, okay, what is the author actually trying to say, even though they thought these things. Um, Same thing with Aristotle himself. Like in one of his books, he explores the idea of natural slavery. And you're like, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But he still has so many like he has other good things to say. You just have to try and like actually find what he's trying to say.
Whereas like an oral tradition would have
It would
sort of
adjust
filtered
with
that out.
society.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Makes sense. Just so we can talk after class because I just want to nerd out on this a little bit more. But that one of is actually Socrates in a dialogue called the Phaedrus, and he talks about writing. He was really proud of himself, and a king or a god or somebody was like, "Hey, this isn't the invention that you think it is. Because now that you've invented writing, people's minds are going to become lazy."
Right.
And I just want like maybe that's an extreme. Like I like writing, writing's good, but now I just think like put that on a lot of the technology we have today.
Right.
We don't have to remember as much stuff because we'll just store it on our phone, right? So anyways, yeah,
You
I like what you.
you also lose that like imagination aspect to it as well. Like when you play a video game, you don't have to actually imagine the world that you're in. You get to actually see it. While there is value to that. It also you don't have to think as much, which ultimately questions can it communicate the same moral principles to the same degree, or does it fail in that aspect? Which
Yeah, I think
is
the
to be seen.
strongest part of everything you have to say is that stories communicate moral principles. Other principles, sure, but like stories communicate morality in a way that few other ways of communicating do. And it makes sense that Jesus would tell, like, I love that passage that that's what seems like the primary means by which Jesus taught was by way of a story,
Yeah.
telling a story. Sorry for monopolizing the conversation. Anybody else have any
no,
questions?
I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you.
And part I love why we do what we do. But very proud of
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Um, not it's fine. Did you Did you, in your research, explore the impact? Did your research take?
I honestly did not, but I can give an idea if you want.
No, it's totally fine. It's just I'll be like it's like a
I mean,
yeah, it's really bad. It speaks in addition to like postmodernism,
right,
basically, and so much of society,
right.
and at its essence, it's an understanding so much of society,
Right.
how we see it.
I mean, it's the same thing with the Bible, right? So, like the people who were reading it in the time, you can tell me if this doesn't actually answer what you're trying to get at, but yeah, I mean, the people reading it in the time interpret something different because it's actually relatable for them versus us reading it now. We're like, okay, let's try and understand it through what they see and then what it means for us. That makes
So yeah, it's the modern era, for example, just a contrast. If you go back, it's this idea of like presumption of we're all part of one big story,
okay,
and we don't know everything, but the story exists outside. We don't determine the story,
right,
but there is a grand story outside.
right,
The postmodern movement, please correct, is the shift on the story of life. The story that matters most is mine.
oh, okay,
And if that's the case, it's that shifting of the lens where my story is really the ultimate story. It's fascinating. Like it speaks to your premise.
Yeah, it's basically like wherever you would end with this project, the next project is like, yeah, it's more than just how we tell stories, it's how we receive stories. So like, take the Lord of the Rings, best. Like the way that it was written and told was a very modern way of this big grand meta narrative, like world building, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in the postmodern mind, you'll watch a movie now and there's like no world building.
right.
It's like nobody explains why this person has a superpower. We're just struggling with their internal struggle. Good job, Will. Sorry, I'm
So, what is that?